How's it? Welcome back. Here we go. Starting new book. Trunk Calls. Bill Taylor's second book. This one has only got 26 chapters. So let's begin reading the forwards and stuff. Right. William Holmes Taylor was raised in East Africa, a third-generation African. Educated in England, South Africa, France, and the United States, he holds a degree in biology and a doctorate in dental surgery. Dentistry has been his hobby there, but fishing and animal behavior are his passions. He currently spends most of his time with the elephants in the Zambezi River Valley. Not in the river itself. The afternoon sun shone down from high, lighting up the mountains and the sky. How mystical and picturesque the hue on the far lake shore. Africa, how I love you. Lovely poems here. A place of peace, a place of tranquility, a place with a cool night breeze, where the emerald dove coos and the swooping eagles fly, where the bush baby visits and your heart soars high, a place where you'll remember to visit again and again. Shelley Craven. Alright, acknowledgements. After having written a bit about my father in Wet Breams, I had a lot of requests for more stories about my family. It was easy to sit down at the computer and reminisce through the keyboard. I find myself very lucky to have had the parents I had. They gave me a lifetime of memorable experiences. Same as my parents. I'm very, very grateful for the parents that I have. They've given me a very good upbringing. Thanks also goes to Cher Cad and Helen Nish for making my English palatable. The best test was to have Meryl read it. She chopped out all the parts that were politically incorrect. I knew it was all right when I could hear her laughing or blowing her nose in the room next door. My sister Paddy came to visit last year and stayed with me at the Chiwori Rivermouth camp on the Zambezi. I love the Chiwori Rivermouth camp, or at least I used to. It was so wild. There's like nothing there, you know. Went there once or twice with my dad and his university friends. Like not a building there. It was fantastic. Now it's all been privatized. Some company bought it, and you know, now they've got nice lodges and lawns and generators and lights, and kind of spoils the beauty and serenity of the bush, you know. I want to be out in the wilderness. Anyway, thanks to her, I was reminded of details that would normally be missed by the male species. She has an incredible memory for emotional stuff, to the point of nauseam. I did find, however, that by adding a sprinkling of it to my stories, that it did give it a better feel. Shelley Craven has been a constant support. Shelley Craven has been a constant support in the publishing of my books. She's a bit dilly at times, but as she is easy on the eyes, great company when drinking tea, and a good friend, we can always forgive a bit of dilliness. Her poems have also added a certain touch of class to my book. My old friend Don Lavalli has been a loyal supporter in the elephant projects that Meryl and I have been conducting. How does one thank qualities like that? Thanks also goes to Iris Ritchie for her great photographs. You'll notice that she is mentioned in the final chapter of the book. She is fondly known as Iris the Virus in Bulawayo, which makes her a legend in a town that is already full of legendary characters. Now a forward by the writer. Bill Taylor has a boy's own adventure of a life, and has the storyteller's knack for drawing both laughter and tears with his tales. You may recognize yourself in his adventures. They're often a universal experience of living in the African bush. Bill has lived with elephants in a most unique way, as part of the family, amongst the herd. He's absorbed both the traditional lore and the scientific knowledge of elephants in his writing. And you are sure to discover a new understanding and a greater love for these extraordinary animals. Aileen Hoffman, writer. I guess I don't know if she was a typist or something for him. I don't know. Beginnings. Their joy is in creating something out of nothing. Lord Delamere, speaking of the early pioneers. My father and I were in our flimsy canvas kayak in the Kazinga Channel, floating down the river between Lake George and Lake Edward in the Queen Elizabeth National Park, located in the western part of Uganda. You couldn't paddle 50 meters without coming to another group of hippos. The bird life was incredible, the kingfishers, rollers and bee-eaters adding a psychedelic splash of color to the landscape. This was a very special trip. Dad didn't often get away from the hospital, so just being with him was very special for me. The experience was so great, we just rode around in silence, soaking in everything that was happening around us. Every now and then I would turn around and glance at Dad. He was not in the least inclined towards spending time in the bush, but a few times he did, today being one of them, the very memorable year of 1963. Around a slight bend of the channel, we came upon a bull elephant with monstrous tusks. I knew him well, as I had spent months in the area. Everyone there called him Mohammed. In body size he wasn't so large, but his tusks were enormous, weighing approximately 150 pounds a side. Wow, it's one of the big tuskers. Very few of those left now. He had just finished his annual must period and was very thin. During must, a male elephant's whole nature changes. His posture changes from one of unconcern to one of aggressiveness. His steps change from the normal to long strides. His head is held higher, the chin tucked in a bit, a posture of hostility. During this period of 2 to 3 months, his eating greatly decreases and he loses a lot of weight. His penis is usually sticking out 3 to 4 feet, a moldy green color and dribbling urine the whole time. His temporal glands are continually oozing liquid as well. And my tracker, Paka, who knew elephants better than anyone I know, would inform me that the bull's face was swollen due to the enlarged glands. The combination of the oozing temporal glands and the dribbling urine could be smelled from a distance, even if the wind was against you. From a distance, the silhouette was enough for Paka and I to recognize a bull in must, and we would be sure to keep our distance. Paka was the 7th generation of elephant hunters in his family. Wow. I had cycled down to the Chambura with my blanket, pot, maize meal, salt, matches, and a pellet gun. I met Paka on the road and formed an attachment to the older man. He must have been in his mid-40s, but then in Africa it could have been mid-60s and not made much difference. A couple days later he found me trailing along behind a herd of elephants. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I want to learn the ways of the elephants," I replied. "How can you learn of elephants from such a distance?" There were huge clumps of capparis growing in an otherwise open plain, and we used these to get up close to the herd. It was here that my first lessons in elephant behavior started. There's the mama Mukubwa, the big mama. That one there is her sister, and that one there is another sister, but a lot younger. 7 generations of information were passed on to me. Today I read books on elephants by the great elephant gurus. Ian Douglas Hamilton, Cynthia Moss, Joyce Poole, and their printed page has made them famous in the world of conversation. But to Paka, family units, months, what he calls periods, and communication had all been passed on to him as a part of life. As we lay in the grass one day close to a herd, we heard a sound that sounded like distant thunder. "The elephants are talking," stated Paka. 20 years later, I found out about infrasonic communication. However, there are still treasures no researcher has ever proved, but Paka has taught me. According to him, all elephants know their fathers. If you were to conceive only 8 to 10 times in your lifetime, would you not remember each occasion? And as elephants know all the elephants they meet, they teach their children who their father is. Paka also taught me that the females stay with the mothers, but the males, after they are kicked out of the maternal herd, go to find their fathers. I found this hard to believe, as so many males are killed for their ivory, but Paka's explanation made sense. If a male went to his father, and then the grandson came, or another brother came, then they should all be related. You see how all the males look alike in that head, he pointed out. In speaking with professional hunters who are good naturalists, they tell me that the thing they notice most about herds of males is their likeness in looks. Maybe yet another 20 years of elephant research will prove Paka right. But anyway, here was Mohammed, eating with gusto to try and regain his weight. Eating was his only concern, and he totally ignored us. We were floating not more than 5 meters from him, and as he pulled up great clumps of grass, beating the muddy roots against his right tusk, we would be sprayed with bits of soil. He would then take the clump of grass, stuff it into his mouth, and chew off the roots with his great molars, dropping the roots to the ground. Considering that a normal bull eats about 300 kilograms of food a day, a bull recovering its weight after must eats even more. They become very proficient at eating, whether it's grass or stripping bark from the acacias or leaves from different trees. We floated in an eddy watching him, Dad with a look of trepidation on his face. "Don't worry, Dad, we are quite safe." "Did I ever tell you about the first elephant I saw in the bush?" Dad asked. We had moved to an unfinished mission hospital in Manyovu in 1948. I was only 2 years old, so I don't remember the hardships my folks went through in the beginning. I can only imagine what it must have been like for Dad, as he had been raised in Hollywood, wearing all the latest in clothes, enjoying theatres, movies, friends, and everything that wasn't at Manyovu. A builder by the name of Willis Sparrow was to have finished our home and hospital before we arrived. But, in due African fashion, our house wasn't finished until 2 years after we arrived, and the hospital was only finished in 1955. Funds to complete the hospital had run out, so Dad went on a safari to visit all of his wealthy patients in the Indian community. With their help, he was able to complete the hospital and sent them all invitations to the opening ceremony. One can tell by the photograph how proud they were of their combined efforts. But I must take my hat off to Dad. He made do with what he had. He built himself an operating theatre from a mud hut, putting large windows all around for lighting. A mosquito net was hung over the table so that the lizards wouldn't fall from the thatch onto the sterile area. A badminton racket was kept handy to swat bumblebees or the odd bat. Emergency cases that took place at night had to have Mom as an assistant. Ether was dripped onto the patient's mask, so no pressure lamps were allowed. She would hold the torch, drip the ether, try to pass the instruments at the same time. On one particularly gruesome operation, Dad looked over to see his assistant slowly slumping to the ground. He shouted out, "Don't contaminate the sterile area!" He grabbed the lamp and with his leg helped Mom gently to the floor. Somehow, he still managed to finish the operation by himself. Wow, that's incredible. All of our help came from surrounding villages, and as there were many lions, everyone was always home by sundown. When emergencies came in during the night, it was usually 4 men carrying a mochila and several men with spears around for protection and to trade off with the carriers. Equipment was almost non-existent in the beginning. The autoclave an autoclave like sterilizers equipment. The autoclave was Mom's pressure cooker. Rubber gloves were sterilized and reused. When a hole appeared, the gloves were patched with other gloves that were wholly beyond patching. The fingers were cut in small rings to act as rubber bands, which my sister Patty was to wear in her hair for years. IV fluid was made from rainwater, sugar and salt being added before autoclaving it. Syringe needles were resharpened and reused. Mom's nail scissors, and in fact the whole manicure set, was sterilized and used for removing cataracts. A lot of operations Dad had never seen himself, so it was back to the textbooks, often reading them while operating. I remember well the first goiter operation. He was at it for 7 hours, the offending goiter weighing in at 15 pounds. Years later, when I was his assistant, he would expertly palpate the goiter, and then in his professor's voice announce, 41 minutes. I would watch the clock, and as the second hand would swing around to the end of the 41st minute, I would snip the loose ends off the last suture. Before Mum's garden started to produce, Dad used to go off hunting. He knew little to nothing about shooting, but somehow used to come home with something. Often it was a sheep or a goat from a grateful patient. Then the garden started to produce. No one ever came to the mission without leaving with bundles of leeks, spinach, beets, carrots, string beans, tomatoes, strawberries, celery, and various pumpkins. It's like Mom. Every time we move to a new house, she plants a whole new vegetable garden and orchard, and inevitably we move again before the orchard starts producing. But we always had fantastic vegetables and berries from our Mom's garden. Father Dave from the next door Catholic mission came by regularly on his old BMW motorcycle. So, just getting some milk. Finished my tea already. Father Dave from the next door Catholic mission would come by regularly on his old BMW motorcycle and would leave with his panniers full of vegetables, his robes flapping in the breeze. All the Catholic priests wore white robes, black shoes, and the black rosary around their neck. Sitting on Father Dave's lap one day, I asked what those little black things were around his neck. Goat droppings, he informed me. We had a church built from sun-dried bricks. The walls only came up to 5 feet, and then there was a space of about 3 feet before the eaves of the thatch began. Our benches were made out of rows of the sun-dried bricks. An old granny used to come each week and sit on the last row with us. She was topless, as most Waha women were then, and her breasts hung like a basset hound's ears, lying flat against her wrinkled belly. Around her neck hung a goat's horn, which carried liquid snuff. She would take out the stopper, pour some of the liquid into the palm of her hand, and then with a loud snort, suck up the rich brown liquid. Her head would tip back, and from a fold in her waist, she would take out a piece of split bamboo and peg it on her nose to close the nostrils. Her head would come back to the normal position, and then I would wait for the sneeze. To sneeze when you have your nose blocked is a hard thing to do without letting the air escape somewhere else, and for old people it was even harder. She would draw in a huge lungful of air and let it rip from top to bottom. This always pleased me no end. Snuff would also leak out from her nose, as the bamboo was not enough to hold back the pressure. This was wiped off with the back of the hand, and then wiped onto her skirt. I always thought Dad was busy listening to the sermon, but he must have found the old woman just as amusing as I did, because one day he gave her a clothes peg. This she received with glee, and it did stop the leakage from the nose. But the other leakages were even greater. Oh, jeez, man. Then after the sneeze would come the spit. From way down in the depths, she would hawk up a glob of spittle and snuff. Turn her head towards the wall, and from a sitting position, spit expertly between two poles over the top of the wall to the outside. My admiration knew no bounds. She, with the numerous lizards that would chase each other around the bare rafters, kept me from boredom in church. And even today, when I hear certain old hymns being sung or played on the radio, I can still sing along in the Kiha dialect. Our closest district commissioner was in Kasulu, 32 miles away. This might seem like a small distance, but the roads were so bad that it would always take at least 2 hours to get there during the dry season, and sometimes the whole day during the rainy season. Everybody used to gather at the old German fort, which was the DC's residence, for sundowners on the weekend, to chat and drink, but mostly to drink. The DC's wife would always have a designated place that she would demarcate where the men had to relieve themselves. She would say in a high-pitched voice, "I can't get fertilizer, so I want all you men to help me make nice pansies. Just in this one bed, please, men." At one of these functions, the men were making fun of Dad's American shorts. They were the same length as the colonial shorts, but fitted to the leg and thigh. The colonial shorts were made of khaki drill and so baggy that one could easily see that most of the men didn't wear underpants. Dad sat without saying anything as the men sniggered as to how immodest his shorts were. "Immodest? Immodest?" Mom queried. At that moment, one of the men dropped his modest colonial shorts and proceeded to show us the teeth marks on his very white bottom that had been caused by an irate hippo a month previous. "Modesty, my foot," Mom snorted. Dad's shorts were never mentioned again. "1953 saw all of us, including Dad's mother, piled into a 1946 Plymouth, heading to Cape Town on holiday. Today I see overland trucks. They have come down the length of Africa in 3 to 4 weeks. It took us 2 months to get to Cape Town. Yo, now that's a trip, eh? I was particularly interested in certain procedures taking place at White Bridge. I'd grown up as a white Muha tribesman, knowing very little of white culture. At the border going into South Africa from Rhodesia, I watched in fascination as a customs officer came out and inspected the boot of a white man's car. It was completely loaded with pawpaws. From what I could see, he was not allowed to take them into South Africa. So he took all of them out of his car and lined them up in a straight line. Then, to the horror of the customs officer, and to my delight, he backed over every single pawpaw and then drove on, waving as he left. We rented a house in Claremont, a suburb of Cape Town, and in no time at all, we had the routes to the beach taped. I found a jackass penguin coated in crude oil and brought it home. With a lot of detergent, we managed to clean off this beast, and then began the hard work. Every day it was to the shops to buy sardines for this fish factory that squawked all day. I kept it in the bathtub so everyone had to shower. I, like my father, maintained that only a pig wallows in its own water. But I had a lot of but I had a lot of pressure put on me in subtle ways by the ladies of the family. It was a great day for them when I wrapped my penguin in a towel and took him down to the beach and set him free. In no time, our 6-month holiday was over and we were headed back to Tanganyika. 6 months? That's a decent holiday, eh? Need 2 of those every year. Eh? Needed two 6-month holidays every year. On the way home, we stopped at Kimberley and went to see the big hole. That's Kimberley Diamond Mine. There were many visitors and I got separated from my parents. What is it about high places and little boys? My mother shouted at me, but it was too late. From between 2 strangers, I was spurting a beautiful arc out into space, the stream breaking up in a fine mist before it hit the bottom. There's something very satisfying about peeing off a high edge, isn't there? Yeah, you women probably can't relate, but the men out there, you know what I'm talking about. Peeing off a cliff, it's fantastic. Anyway, the parallel strips of tarmac in Rhodesia were the last of the good roads when we left Victoria Falls. Near the place that is now known as Kaloma, we got stuck good and proper. 2 of the springs were broken. We were down to the axles in mud, and all our water bottles were also broken. The last sign of human habitation we had seen was at PWD camp, 40 miles back. The mosquitoes were so bad we had to sleep in the car with the windows rolled up, making the heat quite oppressive. The following morning, Paddy and I got out and started slopping around in the puddles immediately. We were warned not to drink the water. We assured Mum that we were only washing our face. However, we washed all day from those mud puddles and managed to drink just enough to keep us from getting dehydrated. Dad had left early in the morning to walk back to the PWD camp to try and get help. Knowing him like I do now, I know this in itself was quite a feat, as Dad was 100% the scholar. Somewhere along the road he heard a noise and looked up in the tall brush next to the road. There was an elephant peering down at him. In asking for details, he could only tell me the obvious. All I can remember is how frightened I was. He ran down the road until exhaustion and the heat overcame him. When he woke up, he was being cradled by a mostly naked black man who was making him drink tea laced with salt. It apparently did the trick, as he was accompanied on to the PWD camp from there. I wonder what PWD stands for. Let's look it up. We had spent 3 nights in the car finishing all our food. By now, our small group were all drinking from the mud puddles, which were replenished every afternoon by downpours. Along came this red pickup with the DC's wife aboard. In a flash, she had a picnic table set up, tablecloth laid, sandwiches and tea laid out. We had never seen ham before, so before wolfing down the buttered bread, we sailed the little pink slices out into the bush. Oh man. Apparently the area was crawling with lions, which we had heard every night, so an armed guard was left with us as the DC's wife drove on to fetch Dad. 3 hours later, Dad came back with mechanics, spares, and within a couple of hours we were en route again. We were stuck several times again, but after that, never overnight. The springs broke a couple more times, but then it was par for the course, and everyone knew how to repair them, so it was no problem. Dad's first elephant and my first holiday, but certainly not the last. Alright, sure, bit of a long chapter with all the forwards and acknowledgements and stuff, but there we go. First chapter of Trunk Calls. Hope you enjoyed. Sleep well. Good night, and see you tomorrow. Cheers.